Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to our global audience, and welcome to today's Impact webinar, Enabling Japan's Cross-Border CCS Partnerships from National Strategy to Global Synergies. My name is Molly Huang, Head of Content at Leader Associates, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this important session. As many of you know, Japan is advancing one of the world's most structured and pragmatic CCUS strategies, backed by strong industry alignment, faithful policy commitment, and growing public-private investment. The long-term success will not be successful with only domestic action. CCS is inherently cross-border. It depends on coordinated progress in transport, storage, financing, and innovation. And that's why today's discussion is so critical. Today, we focus on one central question. How can Japan and its partner countries translate bilateral initiatives into a connected, scalable CCS ecosystem across the Indo-Pacific and beyond? We will begin with lessons from Europe's early CCS development from Wood Mackenzie, followed by deep dives into Japan's collaborations with Australia, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and Alberta of Canada. To close, we will learn from JBIC's perspective on unlocking cross-border investment at scale. Before we begin, just a few quick notes that number one, today's session is being recorded and we will share the replay with you next week. And number two, audience Q&A is open throughout. You are most welcome to post your questions in the Q&A box at any time. We will raise selected questions after each keynote. Please note that this webinar is proudly part of the lead-up to the upcoming Japan CCUS Summit 2025, Japan's leading event for CCUS taking place this October the 15th to 16th in Tokyo, Japan. We'd like to sincerely thank our partners and sponsors for making this program possible, including Energy Transition Partners, Impacts, Shell, BP, Strategic Knowledge Partner Wood Mackenzie, Platinum Sponsor JNG, Gold Sponsors S&P Global, Linklaters, Holden, and SLB Capturi, and many more. Thank you for your continued support in driving forward the global carbon management agenda. And now, to kick off today's program, I'm delighted to welcome our first keynote speaker on stage, Ms. Hetal Gandhi, Lead CCS for Asia Pacific at Wood Mackenzie. Ms. Hetal will walk us through lessons from Europe's early CCS development and what they can teach us as cross-border CO2 transport begins to take shape in Asia Pacific. Ms. Hetal, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. While I display the slide, thank you so much, Molly, for enabling this session, and good afternoon to everybody for being there for the session. Just give me a moment for sharing my screen.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Thank you, and good afternoon once again. It's a pleasure for Wood Mackenzie to be a part of this forum and specifically engage in discussion linked to cross-border transport. To be sure, cross-border is one of the most emerging and recent trends that has been in spotlight from a CCUS perspective. I would say the foundation of cross-border transport comes from the growth lined up for the sector itself. So to give you a backdrop, there is a lot of progress that is happening and trends which are emerging in the CCUS sector. We have almost 1,500 projects that we track as a part of our database for Wood Mackenzie, and you can see unique trends emerging. For instance, more than 950 MTPA of projects are seeking FID between 2025 this year and 2030. Close to 170 MTPA of projects have already taken FID over the past 5 years. Prospects of the sector we see are closely linked with policy reforms and regulatory changes. So we have frameworks in place that consider short-term as well as long-term factors that impact the sector. Another promising trend that's emerging is cross-border transport, and we'll try and cover certain aspects of that today as we move ahead in this webinar. So feel free to post your questions while I take you through a few slides. I'll not trouble you for more than 15 minutes. The foundation of CCUS is clearly in the growth that is outlined for the sector. And as you can see in the slide, we are seeing multiplier growth that is expected to happen in the sector. Today, we would be at close to, or 2025, we would close at close to 74 to 75 MTPA of capture capacity. And we believe over the next 5 years, that itself will grow at a multitude pace, reaching around 250 MTPA by 2030. From that 250 MTPA that we're talking about, we are expected to more than double in 5 years, reaching 444 MTPA by 2035, and then almost 1,000 MTPA by 2040, doubling further to reach more than 2,000 MTPA by 2050. This clearly outlines that the growth trajectory is expected to be robust. But please note that with all this growth also, CCUS is expected to abate only 4% of today's emissions. What I'm trying to communicate is, while the technology is expected to show good momentum and growth, it's an expensive technology and therefore be used selectively. Also, the drivers of the growth during different times of the tenure are going to be different, and that is depicted by the colors on the graph. So for instance, you see the dark blue color, which is energy-linked emissions, point source, which are being captured. They include technologies like upstream, natural gas production and processing, which is mostly pre-combustion capture, also includes hydrogen and refining, which is picking up pace in terms of cost dynamics, and expensive technologies like power. Until 2030, it is the natural gas production and processing pre-combustion technologies that will dominate the dark blue color. From 2030 onwards, you will start seeing blue hydrogen slowly gathering pace until 2040. And it is only beyond 2040 that you will see expensive technologies like power and refining also gathering pace, as carbon prices in different formats will start becoming more predominant, especially in economies like Europe and North America. The light blue color indicates industrial emissions, again, point to source only. And you can see that by 2035, you will reach almost 100 MTPA of industrial emissions, a slow and steady pickup in those capacities. But after 2035, the growth is again multiplier, much higher than the otherwise growth rate that you will experience in the sector. So we believe that industrial emissions, especially process emissions in sector like cement and also in sectors like steel, will start gathering pace only post 2035. Again, these sectors have technologies linked to CCUS, which are at an expensive stage, lowering of cost as scale builds up, more projects get tested, and plus upliftment in the carbon pricing regime will drive offtake in the sector. All in all, what we are seeing is industrial emissions will be around 35% of the total capture capacity by 2035, and engineered removals, which includes capacities in direct air capture and BECCS-based projects, will be around 15% of the total capture capacity. We are stating that all of this will result into USD 1.4 trillion worth of investments only in point-to-source emissions. And if you include engineered removals, then your investments will cross 1.4 trillion. So the growth in the sector is going to result in a number of trends emerging. Now, let me take you to the moot point of cross-border transport. We do forecast not only capture capacities, but also storage capacities until 2050. And if you look at the slide on the left, I have plotted for key countries storage capacities forecasted until 2050, along with capture capacities. The top countries show the storage capacities might be higher in a number of countries in Asia, Pacific, and Europe as compared to the domestic emissions that would be captured. These countries, therefore, have the scope to become importers of carbon. On the other hand, if you see the bottom side of the chart, right from Germany to Singapore, most of the countries you will see that the captured emissions for the countries would be much higher than the domestic storage capacity available. These countries, therefore, will be the exporters of carbon, facilitating an opportunity emerging for cross-border carbon transport. We peg that opportunity at around 160 MTPA by 2050. In short, roughly 10% of the total carbon emissions that will be captured in the point-to-source capacity. A lot of regulations and ecosystems need to build up for this to become a reality. And we are seeing that on the right, you can see that there are countries in Europe where bilateral agreements are placed, and there are also Article 6 amendments which are being adapted. Most of Asia Pacific needs to grow and explore much more as we move ahead in this journey. To get into the subject a little more in deeper, in the next slide, I have shown what is happening in terms of transactions between various countries within Europe and Asia Pacific. The top left corner shows dealings between European countries, and the right-hand side bottom shows you what's happening between Asia Pacific countries. It is clear that Asia Pacific needs to gather pace to align policies and regulations for cross-border. If you look at the European counterparts, almost all European countries have signed, are assigned authority to London Protocol, and they also have at least 11 bilateral trade agreements in place between various countries. You can also see almost 5 of them having different kinds of MOUs in place, and another 4 exploring options for future sign-up. As compared to Europe, you will see less of greens and more of oranges and lighter shades, which means that most of Asia Pacific has either MOCs or MOUs lined up, or they are exploring options. The first bilateral trade agreement for carbon transport in APAC is yet to be signed, and achieving that milestone in 2025 could be crucial as countries try to move ahead in the regulatory landscape. But that's not all for regulations, and there are a lot of micro points that also need to be covered. We believe funding, for instance, is one such aspect. For instance, European countries are a part of consolidated funding mechanisms under EU ETS, because of which there are funds that are available for PCI and PMI projects, which is projects of mutual interest, where there are funds being allocated. Apart from that, each of the individual countries also have specific funds which are available for different kind of projects. Asia Pacific needs to also gather pace in that. So what are the parameters that Asia Pacific needs to look at? And there is a 6-pillar framework that Asia Pacific needs to look at if it really wants to gather pace from a cross-border perspective. For example, it should have the right CCUS foundation in terms of regulations to get the ecosystem in place for promoting cross-border. There are parameters like regulatory harmony, basically covering carbon accounting, operational guidelines, and liability risk management norms, while a lot of this is also being left for commercial contracts to be signed in, but MOUs and bilateral agreements do provide guidelines in the direction in which they want countries to go or stakeholders within countries to go. Stakeholder roles and standards also need to be defined. Clarity on that needs to emerge not only from a storage perspective, but also from a number of other aspects like liability risk monitoring, monitoring of storage after the project has completed injection, so on and so forth. Last 2, but more important, are also linked to finance, enabling regional cooperation for finance for cross-border projects, and regionally traded carbon prices would be equally important to have cross-border transportation of carbon. What I have done is just picked up countries in Asia Pacific and a few countries in Europe and tried to give a color coding on where they stand on each of these pillars. I would say Denmark and Norway in Europe have benchmarks set for almost all of these 6 pillars, and most other need to evolve, and they would be at different stages. While there are countries in Europe also that need to evolve, Asia Pacific is significantly behind and needs to gather pace. Now, with this background, where are we in terms of announcements? So when I peep into my 1,500 projects, what I see is almost 40 MTPA of capacity for cross-border projects is already announced globally. 30 corporates have committed to investments in cross-border CCUS. This includes players across Europe, Japanese players, and across the value chain of transport, capture, as well as storage. Almost 2 MTPA of capacity has cross-border contracts which are agreed predominantly in Europe, and there are at least 20 projects which are considering cross-border as an option. So there is an evolving nature to the market, and a lot is happening in the space. Now, we can't end this conversation without speaking about one of the most spoken about project for being the largest one for cross-border carbon transport to come in space. The Northern Lights Phase 1 is in a way becoming a classic example of how funding support can enable an ecosystem to develop in cross-border transport. It is going to be the world's first commercial scale cross-border CO2 transport storage solution and will pioneer use of carbon carrier shipping as a transport option. It is using both shipping as well as pipeline to have a completion for the project and has 3 emitters attached to the first phase. On the left, while I have outlined the basic structure of the project, on the right, from our valuations piece, I have picked up levelized cost for the project, which is the dark blue line, and levelized revenues. And you can see that there is some kind of viability that you are seeing for each of the parts of the project. But please note, a large percentage of revenues in this project are being supported by government capex, generous across most formats, as well as OPEX support, which is provided for almost 10 years for each of the parts of the project. Over and above that, you also have carbon pricing support, either voluntary or compliance, that is also helping out the emitters, resulting into IRRs which are reasonable. Please also note that there are projects which have a combination of utilization as well as storage happening together, which is resulting into higher IRRs for those specific projects. But all in all, government support for the hub is almost 60% of the total levelized revenue, and for emitters could be in the range of 20% to 40%. So government support is going to be very crucial for cross-border carbon transport, along with evolution of the carbon pricing market as we move ahead. What should Asia Pacific focus on when they look at all of this? 3 things to begin with. G2G bilateral agreements needs to be signed up on priority to build confidence among stakeholders. There needs to be a focus groups established for common standards and operational guidelines and an efficient ecosystem to float around cross-border transport, and establish a framework for pooled funding of infrastructure to ensure that APAC has funding in place, as it lacks regional already established cooperation systems. So with that, let me end my presentation and hand it over back to Molly.
Thank you, Ms. Hetal, for setting the stage and also for this very insightful overview of Europe's CCS, cross-border CCS development, and also its comparison with APAC. That's indeed a lot that we can learn as we shape our own ecosystems. To zoom in maybe from your last page, you mentioned in Europe we see far more bilateral agreements than APAC. So can you tell us what is the liability framework that underpins Europe's early cross-border CCS success so that they can achieve these bilateral agreements? And in your view, what are the most transferable elements that APAC countries can apply?
Thanks for the question, Molly. So there are no straight answers, but if you look at Europe, most of the countries fall under the EU ETS directive, and they adopt IPCC standards for defining the definition of carbon accounting itself, and also where does the liability lie, whether when it is getting captured and there is a leakage at the time of capture, or when it is at transport level, or when it is at the storage level. Now, this definition is a standard framework which is being adopted by EU. Unfortunately, that framework does not exist in Asia Pacific. So defining a carbon price trading framework at an Asia Pacific level, as more and more carbon prices get established across Asia Pacific, and then defining or taking an umbrella of aspects like IPCC accounting standards will provide a lot of clarity to stakeholders. Of course, there will be certain aspects of it that will be left for commercial transactions that will emanate, but it will give a lot of direction in terms of what are the base norms on which these liability frameworks will be established. So we need to have committees at a regional level that start discussions on this and that set up standards which will be adopted at a regional level. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Hetal. And also we got a new audience questions coming in from Lokesh Jayan. He said, I noticed that your presentation did not highlight India or China, which are among the largest emitters and key markets for CCUS. Do you have any specific findings on how CCUS applies in these contexts?
So in China, we are already having valuations that are live, and we are seeing that there are small scale testing projects which are already operational. But we do believe that it's going to be more a domestic market. China, India being emitters will have a role to play at an overall Asia Pacific forecast level. In fact, China is going to be amongst the largest contributor in the total Asia Pacific capacity that we forecast both for 2035 as well as 2050. India will gather pace only after 2035, and we believe it could be around 10 to 15% of the market or the capacity that we are underpinning for Asia Pacific. But from a cross-border perspective, we don't see both these countries playing a predominant role. There may be certain instances, specifically in China, where neighboring countries might use, specific Chinese storage sites of over a period of time. But currently, we don't see even China playing a role from an overall cross-border transportation perspective. We believe Australia, Indonesia, and Malaysia will be the key importers of carbon, and they will play the most important role in satisfying requirements, which will be predominantly led by Japan, followed by South Korea and Singapore. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Hetal. And that comes to our next question. So one major difference between APAC and Europe in cross-border CCS is that the transmission distance are much longer, and most of them are carried out by shipping. So how realistic is Japan's near-term readiness for large-scale CO2 transport infrastructure, particularly with regard to shipping and port terminals? And also the question from Elizabeth Marcius, what are the technical and operational challenges in establishing these integrated CO2 transport networks across borders? Do we see some common specs emerging from the board?
Thanks for the question. So again, each region has its own unique challenges. You're right about the distance, but the overall marine landscape of Europe is much more tougher as compared to Asia Pacific when it comes to cross-border transportation. And therefore, the challenges are unique from that standpoint when it comes to Europe and to the North Sea. On the other hand, you are going to have options of pipeline which are also being explored, especially when you look at countries like Singapore and their distance from countries like Malaysia. So we don't believe that it is going to be only limited to shipping. You will also see some unique pipelines emerging, but the quantum might be smaller. As far as shipping is concerned, we do see a lot of routes announced where Japan is testing, and even South Korea is looking at testing, where players are talking about testing routes not only to West and Northern Australia, but also to the southern part of Australia. So until 2030, you will see a lot of these tests actually being conducted and the framework coming in place in terms of underpinning and having common funds for funding infrastructure, for having a sharing mechanism in terms of who is going to contribute how much to the funding of those common sets of infrastructure which will be put in place. It is only after 2030 that you will start seeing meaningful commissioning of projects that will start cross-border transport at a smaller scale and will pick up substantially post 2035. So the timelines are a little more stretched from an Asia Pacific perspective because a lot of groundwork needs to be done. There is one more study that we had done, which we had presented this year at the AEP by my storage colleague, Fozzie, and it focused upon how there can be differences in cost of storage sites across various parts of Asia Pacific. And if there are players who are able to select the right site with a low cost attached, then you will be able to offset a lot of cost which is linked to the cross-border transportation and the longer distance that we are talking about. And there are such instances which are actually present, which can actually result in Japan's domestic storage cost being just marginally lower than a cross-border cost to all the way up to Australia, depending upon the kind of storage site that is being selected. So it's going to be wisdom, strategic partnerships, and the ecosystem all at play that will help in governing this cost from an Asia-Pacific perspective. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Hetal, and thank you, the audience, for the questions. Although I would love you to speak more, but time is tickling. So Ms. Hetal will be moderating our opening session at the Japan CCUS Summit. So if you wish to mingle with Hetal, we warmly welcome to join us in person. And now last, it's a great pleasure to welcome our second speaker, Ms. Celeste Caravas, CEO of the Australian-Japan Business Council of Victoria. Leveraging decades of Japan-Australia energy partnership experiences, Celeste will take us inside evolving Japan-Aussie CCUS progress. Ms. Celeste, the stage is now yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Molly. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining. Hajime mashite. So my name is Celeste Caravas. I'm CEO of the Australia-Japan Business Council of Victoria. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. May we carry forward their spirit of stewardship as we chart our course for the year to come. So today I will cover three topics: the attractiveness of Australia versus Southeast Asia for Japanese transboundary CO2, key enablers to unlock Japan-Australia transboundary CCS, and progress of Japan-Australia bilateral agreement for transboundary CCS. So firstly, let's consider the London Protocol. So Australia is a party to the London Protocol and has ratified the 2009 CCS amendment. The Australian government has declared 4 countries that it's focusing on: Japan, Korea, Singapore, and Timor-Leste. And the fact that Australia is a party to the London Protocol and has ratified the 2009 amendment allows other countries to leverage the framework to accelerate the execution of a bilateral agreement. Japan is nearly there with its own bilateral agreement. It's only officially ratified the 2006 amendment, and the 2009 amendment ratification is still needed. It's yet to submit its unilateral declaration of acceptance to the IMO. So while Japan has a CCS Business Act, which has a broader scope, and the Diet has passed legislation that allows Japan to do transboundary CCS, the subsequent declaration has not happened. And this is an important procedural requirement where the IMO notifies to the world that Japan has provisionally accepted the 2009 amendment. Okay. Turning now to a second point, Australia is an early mover when it comes to CCS regulations. So, of course, Malaysia and Indonesia also have relevant advanced CCS regulations, especially driven by Petronas and Parcero. Countries like Thailand and Vietnam within Southeast Asia are a little bit less mature. And countries like Indonesia, for example, have much higher local content requirements compared to Malaysia and even Australia. However, there are further distinct advantages with Australia. So in Australia, the Offshore Petroleum and Greenhouse Gas Storage Act was enacted early and has been tested with actual projects. The safeguard mechanism for Australia has also created impetus for CCS projects, and we've seen real projects happen. We saw last month, about a month ago, on the 3rd of July, the Bonaparte CCS project was awarded major project status, which was an industry first milestone. So the first CCS project to receive that status in Australia, and that applies to complex projects worth more than 50 million Australian dollars that are deemed vital to national interests and unlocking whole of government support. And that highlights the strategic role of CCS to Australia's net zero goals. The national action list that Australia has produced is also a key differentiator, and I'll talk about that soon. So if we look at the Global CCS Institute Readiness Index, which looks at policy, law, regulation, and storage development, this was downloaded in 2025. Australia is considered a 62 in terms of CCS readiness, whereas Japan, which doesn't appear in this image, is around 50. Most likely due to its extensive policy in CCS and also real government funding. And Malaysia and Indonesia are quite similar at 31 and at 30. So if we look also at the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative 2022, the countries that we're talking about here have quite a different level of readiness. So Japan has some sub-commercial projects and a lot of undiscovered CCS. Australia ranks a little bit higher in terms of discovered CCS, but most importantly, actual capacity. And Indonesia and Malaysia are quite similar in their relative proportions of sub-commercial and undiscovered CCS. So Australia's national action list is unique. It's about predominantly CO2. Only 2 jurisdictions have put out an action list globally. So EU has its CCS directive and guidelines. However, they are more qualitative and they reflect the annexure to the London Protocol. Australia is the only country globally that has prescribed levels of non-CO2 components for meeting its obligations. So it's leading the world in that regard. And this is a sample of, and there's several pages of this, the kind of upper limits in liquid CO2 in terms of contaminants in Australia, and there's detailed guidance there about how to actually formulate the relevant threshold calculations. So Australia also has good geology with extensive pre-existing information on subsurface to de-risk CCS development. So there are prolific basins in Australia, as we can see in this diagram. There has been abundant exploration work done, and that means that project proponents can reach FID with less work. In comparison with a country like Japan, it's quite difficult to gain access to this information. Some of this information does exist in Japan, but it's held in custody by JBIC, and you need to go through a Japanese local partner in Japan in order to access this level of information, whereas in a country like Australia, it's publicly available. Japan also needs to do some seismic survey work when it comes to CCS as well, and that has commenced with the JBIC the 5 of the 9 advanced CCS projects, 5 being domestic, 4 being transboundary. Another attractive aspect, although this can also be a negative depending on how you look at it, of Australian projects for CCS for transboundary from Japan compared to Southeast Asia, is that Australian CCS projects are not led by government-related organisations, they're led by the private sector. So any commercial party can partner and have a fair go, which is a phrase that we use in Australia. So it leads to more competition and opportunities within the industry. So I'll turn now to key enablers to unlock Japan-Australia transboundary CCS. So the first thing that needs to be determined between the countries is the transfer point for responsibility to regulate CCS activity from the emitting nation, Japan, to the storage nation of Australia within the value chain. So the options are to transfer the point of responsibility at the port in Japan or at the receiving terminal in Australia. In the EU, the transfer port is the receiving terminal. There's also a question of responsibility when the CO2 is moving through a third country's economic zone, exclusive economic zone. In the absence of full ratification of the London Protocol and bilateral agreement, we revert to international maritime frameworks, which largely guide us based on the flagging of the ship carrying gas. The second question in terms of unlocking Japan-Australia transboundary CCS is determining who gets credit for the CO2 subtracted from CCS activities. So the Australian government has made it clear that their preference is that it's once the CO2 passes an agreed transfer point that Australia is comfortable to take responsibility for leakage. And the consequence of that is that the associated subtraction of CO2 and any credit that can be attributed goes to the emitter, with the storage nation getting the benefit of the commercial value. This is another point that needs to be clarified in a bilateral agreement, and this follows the concept in the IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. And this compares to a different scheme in Japan called the joint crediting mechanism, which is quite a unique scheme that Japan has set up with developing countries largely, where Japan invests in projects for decarbonisation in developing countries, and the overall emissions reduction is apportioned in an agreed ratio between the two countries. So it's done on a case-by-case basis. So this is what the IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories look at in terms of, the process for determining where the attribution occurs. And this is the Japan joint crediting mechanism that involves around 25 foreign countries to Japan at the moment. So finally, I'll turn to the progress of the Japan-Australia bilateral agreement. So this information I received from the Australian government a few hours ago from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. So it's the latest status and the position of the Australian government. So according to the Australian government, Australia and Japan have had useful information scoping discussions on bilateral instruments to facilitate the transboundary movement of CCS. So I was just in Japan last month, where the Australian government was conducting industry briefings to Japanese participants in CCS to kick this off. Australian government is aware that timing is a key driver for industry and potential partner countries, so they understand the need for speed in this regard. Both countries need to be ready to enter into discussions on bilateral instruments, so we can't assume that the discussions are actually ready to commence to begin with. So Japan has indicated that they will focus on domestic CCS before they look at transboundary, and that's what we've seen within the JOGMEC 9 advanced CCS projects as well, that the 5 domestic projects are being prioritized over the 4 transboundary projects. And if we look at Japan's 7th strategic energy plan and its CCS plan, we don't get any preference from the Japanese government as to whether it will prioritize domestic or transboundary. However, in those documents, Japan says that it will progress both options at the same time, which is what Japan is doing in general with its green transformation or GX. And we're seeing that at the moment that Japan is looking at both domestic and transboundary at the same time. But at this point in time, domestic discussions are more advanced than transboundary, and funding and prioritization of domestic is more advanced. So Australia welcomes the ongoing engagement with Japan until they're ready to commence formal discussions, and Australia on its side has a number of formal processes to conclude before it can commence negotiations. From Australia's perspective, a key focus is to ensure that the obligations under the London Protocol are met. That means that projects are effectively regulated, the marine environment is protected and preserved, which is a big priority in Australia. There's a huge focus on environmental impact assessments and environmental protection, whereas in Japan, you see more focus, for example, on the fisheries industry, a very powerful industry in Japan where CCS projects will actually result in project proponents having to compensate the fisheries industry for loss of business. Australia is also keen to ensure that the risks associated with offshore geological storage are managed and that industry can make investment decisions. Okay, thank you very much. So any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Celeste, for unpacking the progress and advantages of Australia in regional CCS ecosystem. And thank you for your very elaborate elaboration on the current progress. It basically drained all our questions. While we are waiting for the audience questions, here we want to ask ours. So question number one, as you mentioned, Japan is progressing with its advanced CCS program. How might Japan's progress influence Australia's progression to CCUS?
Thank you very much. So Japan is actually taking very much a leadership role within APAC to enable CCS in the region. So we see things like the Asia CCUS network being used for that. And Japan on its side is the most advanced in terms of pursuing research and development of technologies across the CCS value chain. So capture, transport, injection from monitoring, and all other aspects. And what's especially important for us to consider with transboundary CCS between Japan and Australia is the transport aspect. So Japan's actually leading the world when it comes to advancing technical readiness of low pressure liquefied CO2 transport technology. And Australia can really benefit from all that research and development being done by Japan.
Thank you, Ms. Celeste. And the second question from our side is, what is the current status of MOU between Japan and Australia regarding the London Protocol? I know you have touched a little bit about it, but can you elaborate more?
So Australia hasn't entered into formal negotiations with any country, including those 4 announced priority countries in terms of the bilateral agreement, and they will consider the MOUs and bilateral agreements on a country-by-country basis. So while Australia has held initial scoping discussions in relation to the London Protocol and discussed things like policy, regulatory, technical and legal, it hasn't commenced the actual negotiations. However, Australia is very satisfied with the progress of the discussions that have been occurring with Japan. It's also in the process of seeking approvals to commence negotiations with partner countries such as Japan. So needing those approvals as a nation to enter into those nation-to-nation agreements. And it's also progressed policy work on understanding matters of inclusion in future potential bilateral instruments and how they'll be managed. So really good for us to have those examples from the EU as well.
Thank you, Celeste. And that's all of our questions. And I thank you very much for sharing the Japan-Australia CCS progress, and we look forward to hearing more from your side.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with me with the audio.
Thank you, Celeste. And now our attention moves to Jakarta, Indonesia. Please welcome Ms. Diopani Putri, Director of Indonesia and Regional CCS Strategic Initiatives at the Indonesia CCS Center, who will highlight Indonesia's potential to become a regional carbon storage leader. Diopani, the stage is now yours.
Sure. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to actually inform you the progress of our initiative in Indonesia to be the CCS hub regional. So I am Diofani, you can call me Diof. I am the director of the CCS Strategic Initiative of Indonesia CCS Center. And for anyone who are not familiar enough with the Indonesia CCS Center, we are a independent non-profit think tank organization that is currently acting as the bridge to play the vital role for positioning Indonesia to be the CCS hub regional. Because we are currently working with many stakeholders. The first one, obviously, the government. We help them and support them in order to giving a certainty for the regulatory framework. We help the coordinating Ministry of the Economic Affairs and also with the several implementing ministries such as Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Investment, Ministry of Industry, and etc. So we work with the government together to make CCS happen in Indonesia. And our second hand, we're also working together with the industry. So all of the companies here for around 23 corporate members comprises within all of the value chain from the capture, transport, and the storage part, ranging from the national state-owned enterprise company, private, regional, and national and international company as well, such as Pertamina, PLN, Pupuk Indonesia, ExxonMobil, BP, Inpex from Japan, as well as from the transportation such as NYK, K-Line, and MOL also are the members of the CCS Center. And we are here to be the bridge between the needs from the industry and the needs from the government. So Indonesia CCS Center acting as literally the bridge between them. And we're also working with the regional and international partners such as the World Bank, United Nations, Global CCS Institute to do the research together and also doing the benchmark in order for Indonesia to implement the CCS cross-border as well. And we are also working with the JBIC, the Japanese government bodies to involving them in order to make the cross-border between Indonesia and Japan happen for the CCS cross-border. And this is just to give you a context setting about how long history is for Indonesia and Japan having in the general economic relations, because for the last, I think, for more than 50 years, Indonesia and Japan has a very strong bilateral relationships together. In total, we already reached the trade more than 30 billion US dollar, especially for the energy trade relations, especially in LNG. So I think Indonesia is one of the biggest exporting countries for Japan to do the LNG. And I think because of this, we want to expand and extending our partnership with Japan, not only with LNG, but also with the CCS, because, you know, the future technology is here to make the LCO2 carrier a dual carrier, you know, going back, sending the LNG and then coming back to Indonesia, sending the CO2 and helping Japan to actually reaching their carbon neutrality action by the 2050. Now, coming back to the CCS, I think currently there are lots of MOU related to CCS between Indonesia and Japan. We call it like from BP and Chubu, PLN and Mitsubishi, and Pertamina with the NYK and also JBIC, talking specifically about the CCS and CCUS studies. And I think for the last 5 years, this year has been one of the monumental year for all of the progress in CCS. And we also recognize that currently Japan has 9 role model CCS projects focusing on the domestic first, but we also acknowledge there are 4 projects that is aiming to be the CCS cross-border project. So I think one of these projects, we are aiming to have a more future collaboration with Japan in order to make the CCS cross-border happen. And the question is, why is Indonesia pursuing this vision or mission to be the CCS regional? Because probably most of you already aware that we do have several, I would say, multiple advantages in Indonesia to implement this. The first one is obviously about our vast storage capacity. We can cater up to 600 gigatons CO2 capable of fulfilling domestic and regional demands. So for your information, Indonesia is currently emitting for more than 600 million tons CO2. So we can cater for more than 1,000 years of CO2 for our domestic emission. But I think it would be nice and it would be good if we can actually share this capacity together with the neighboring countries. So that's the first one. And the second one is obviously about our location, because we are located between the two oceans. This becoming our strategic position within the Asia Pacific to allow doing the cross-border CCS operation. And the third one is involving our initiative in downstream industries. Probably most of you are aware as well that we are currently pursuing to be one of the independent countries in terms of downstream industry. And we are also aiming to integrate the CCS into our downstream industry to unlock the potential of the producing the low carbon products, such as blue ammonia, low carbon cement, low carbon cell, and etc. So that is one of the key why CCS is important, because we treat it as a license to invest in Indonesia. And the next advantages is currently the projects are developing in Indonesia. Last year, we did have 15 pre-projects, but currently in this year, we do have around 19 pre-projects, calculating up to investment value 43 billion US dollars, ranging from the west and the eastern part of Indonesia. And we do have our 3 flagship projects together here. Near Java Island, we have PHE and Exxon projects, and the eastern part we do have BP and also Impacts project for the CCS and CCUS. And from our very west part, we do have in Aceh, in Arun Field as well. And these are the most advanced project that is in place and also having their current timeline to be ready by the 2030. And the last one, I think this is also one of the most important thing that we do have our enhanced regulatory framework. I will elaborate this later after this slide, because we are the first, I think the first Asian country that launched the presidential regulation specifically for CCS and allowing our country to do the CCS cross-border. And then also currently we do have, we signed an MOU for CCS cross-border between Indonesia and Singapore. And we are currently ongoing discussion with Japan and South Korea as well to advance our bilateral agreements. And these are the details about how robust our regulatory framework is for the CCS to give all of the investor kind of like a very good environmental for investment. So we did have our president regulation for the CCS, as I mentioned before, number 14, 2024. This regulation enabling the CCS cross-border monetization, utilization, and also contract amendments for the current project that is currently ongoing for the oil and gas working area, and also can do the CCS beyond oil and gas project area. And that's the umbrella regulation for the CCS. And underneath that umbrella regulation, we also have the derivative regulation from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, number 2, 2023, and also number 16, 2024, talking specifically about the CCUS within the oil and gas project area and outside and beyond oil and gas project area. We kind of like expand the CCS implementation, allowing the operators to charge storage fees and also pay the royalties for Indonesia. And also the regulatory framework for upstream doing the CCS and CCUS, such as the EOR, through the cost recovery, access to carbon credits, and also fiscal incentive. So we do have this implementing regulation in order to make everything in place. Other than that, we also having a guidelines or standard. So last year we did adopt the ISO TC265 for standards here, number 13, 14, 15, and 13, 14, 15, and also 23, regarding the geological storage here. So if some companies want to elaborate and also pursuing their storage fields and also storage company in Indonesia, they can apply the standardization because it has been adopted to our national standards here. And other than that, what is going to be progress for this short-term timeline? I think because we are claiming to be ready to be the regional decarbonization hub, I think what we can do for the next 1 or 2 years, we look forward for our more initiative. The first one is, of course, to make the implementation strategy works under the coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. So the CCS initiatives is currently in coordination with the coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. And for the next 5 years, I think we are currently having this discussion with the ministry to have a very specific agenda, not only talking about the 5 years plan, but also the technicality of each project that is currently ongoing. Other than that, we're also working on the Ministry of Environment, talking about the material classification for the CO2, because now we don't want the CO2 to be classified as waste, but rather than as waste, we want to classify it as the commodity. And the other progress is with the Ministry of Investment. So we are currently pursuing the new business license for the CCS industry. So any companies that want to open the business for all the value chain, from the capture, from the transport, and also the storage, they can now kind of like register in our new business license in Indonesia. So the CCS is already being an official business industry in Indonesia. And other than that, we're also having this potential economic enablers to drive decarbonization. We do have our incentive as the pioneer industry. So we all aware that CCS is cost intensive, but I think Indonesia as a developing country, we cannot act as a developed country who can actually giving out the cash and also the capex grants for the projects. But instead, we do have several initiatives such as giving an incentive for the pioneer industry by giving tax reduction facilities and also giving the project to be one of the national strategic project to expedite the process in terms of fiscal and non-fiscal terms. And also we do have our initiative in terms of gaining the carbon credits from the CCS. And also accordance with the applicable standards here. And yeah, I think that would be all for my presentation. I'll give it back to you, Molly.
Thank you, Ms. Diopani, for such a compelling outlook into Indonesia's positioning as a regional CCS hub. And we're excited to see a lot of concrete projects with Japan and international players going on, and also with great regulation as baseline. There's one thing to note from your presentation is the 70-30 allocation model that present both ambition and complexity. So the question number 1 from us is, could the 70% domestic allocation risk slowing down international partnerships? And how is this being addressed in regulatory discussion these days?
Yeah, well, thank you, Molly, for the great questions, because I think this is one of the biggest question mark from the other countries as well, because we mentioned specifically about the 70 and 30 allocation, right? But I think that is worth noting that our presidential regulation doesn't lock this into specific fields, projects, or timelines. So in our regulation, we've kept it very flexible on purpose. So Indonesia can always adapt as the market develops and as our national priorities evolve. So I think when we talk about the 70-30 allocation, I think it is important to see it is not a rigid limit, but as a sequencing strategy. Because right now, the strongest demand, we recognize that is coming from the regional markets. And we want to leverage that first to activate investment, get projects moving, and build the transport and storage infrastructure that Indonesia needs. So once that foundation is in place, our domestic emitters will naturally benefit for the ecosystem. So I think rather than holding back the leadership in Indonesia that want to take as the CCS as a regional, this approach can position Indonesia to serve the regional demand today, because we recognize that the market is currently will be activated by the regional market. And also we kind of like laying the groundwork for our domestic decarbonization for future.
Thank you, Giovanni, for your kind address. And the second question is, speaking of investment, what kind of financial or technical support, especially from Japan, would most accelerate Indonesia's readiness as a CO2 storage provider?
Okay, I think if you're talking about the financial needs from Indonesia, currently we do in Indonesia CCS Center, we do have a very deep connection with World Bank and also IFC. And I think because Indonesia, we're currently pursuing our state-owned enterprise company to be the leader of the CCS projects, but we are not kind of like limiting the projects to be operated by the SOE only. But I mean, I think because we want to the CCS facility not only run by the governmental organization or SOE, we kind of like want to move this business model into the PPP, public-private partnerships. It will be the dominant model here to balancing the state oversight and private sector expertise and financing. And also the second option is private-led with the governmental enabling. And I don't know, probably for the third options is for the hybrid approach. So I think in terms of financings, we are aware that Indonesia is currently needs to unlock the potential because there are lots of the financial institutions coming into our country to talk and also to evaluate more regarding the unlocking the regulatory framework and also the technicality out of it. And I think Japanese financial institution can also having this part to expedite the process in the CCS implementation in Indonesia.
Thank you, Ms. Giovanni, and we look forward to also hearing more Indonesian voices in the Japan CCUS Summit and also welcoming you on site. Thank you, and now we're moving from Indonesia, turning to a new frontier for cross-border collaboration. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Luzrio Timi, CCS Coordinator at the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources of Timor-Leste. Mr. Timi will discuss early momentum for Japan-Timor-Leste CCUS partnerships and how this bilateral relationship could support Timor-Leste's own development goals while contributing to a broader Indo-Pacific carbon management vision. Mr. Timi, the stage is now yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huang, and good day to all the participants of this webinar. Okay, so my name is Luzerio, and I am the CCS coordinator in the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources of Timor-Leste, or MPRM for short. And I oversee the development of our CCS project across multiple dimensions, from technical aspects and domestic legislation to bilateral cooperation, stakeholder engagement, and commercial arrangements. So my role is to connect all these different work streams to ensure alignment and push the process forward together with our technical experts, policymakers, partners, and stakeholders. So besides this, alongside this responsibility, I also work as the project delivery manager for our Natarbora LNG projects, which are planned to deliver between 1.5 to 5 MTPA of LNG. Next is just a short list of the topic, the agenda items, which I will touch in my presentation. For those who may not be familiar, Timor-Leste is a small island nation in Southeast Asia, just north of Australia, and sharing a land border with Indonesia. MPRM is the government department responsible for the regulation, coordination, supervision, and licensing of projects in the field of decarbonization. So this includes hydrogen development and CCUS in geological reservoirs and saline formations. So now at first glance, it might seem a little ironic that CCS falls under our ministry, but in fact, the reason is quite clear. Geological reservoirs, the same formations that have stored oil and gas for millions of years, are also the safest and most proven places to permanently store CO2. So the expertise, the data, and the frameworks all naturally sit within our ministry. So the government has also set a direction for the future through a resource development policy that goes beyond traditional upstream oil and gas extraction. The focus now is on diversification into transformational industries, where more value is retained in Timor-Leste and where new opportunities for our people can be created. So CCS is part of this transformation and acts as a bridge between our petroleum legacy and our commitment to a low carbon future. Let me now turn to Bayu Undan offshore gas field. Bayu Undan, the offshore gas field, is located in the Timor Sea, about 250 kilometers south of our coast, and around it lies several other gas fields such as Greater Sunrise, Chudich, and Kelp Deep, as you can see on the map. And this shows the richness of the region's petroleum basin. Bayu Undan itself has produced since 2004 with reserves of 3.4 trillion cubic feet of gas and 400 million barrels of condensate. So over the past two decades, it has contributed more than $23 billion to our petroleum fund, making it a significant driver of our economy. In 2019, after the Maritime Boundary Treaty with Australia, 100% of Bayu Undan came under Timor-Leste's jurisdiction. Bayu Undan was operated by a joint venture led by Santos from Australia as operator, together with SKENS, Timor Gap, our state-owned enterprise, INPEX from Japan, ENI, and Tokyo Timor Sea Resources. And these parties have also expressed their interest in being part of the CCS project. Now, after 20 years of production, the field has reached closure, with cessation and termination of PSC declared in June 2025. But there remains around 1 TCF of recoverable gas. So the government aims to maximize this value before the reservoir transitions to CCS. And if production and CCS were to overlap, it would require technical planning of reservoir management to avoid interference or enhance gas recovery. So looking forward, the pipeline that once carried Bayu Undan gas to Darwin will be repurposed to transport CO2 back for storage. And on the map, it is indicated by that yellow line, which shows from Bayu Undan to Darwin to the south. Decades of hydrocarbon production has given a clear understanding of the reservoir, which is important for the safety of storing CO2. Bayu Undan has a storage capacity of at least 250 million tons, enough to inject more than 10 MTPA for 25 years. The geology is favorable. There is a strong laterally extensive aquifer, and it acts as a natural pressure sink, and it has high permeability over a large interval. Currently, there are 5 wells which can provide about 7 MTPA of injection capacity, and additional wells or sidetracks will increase this. Well integrity checks ensure any unsuitable wells are plugged and abandoned before injection. The main structural traps are the key mechanisms for keeping CO2 contained, and the faults and fractures in the formation are also well mapped, so they don't compromise the reservoir integrity. On the technical front, we have conducted several studies. There are extensive geomechanical and plume modeling, which ensures that the pressure, temperature, and the plume movement remains safely within the reservoir during and after injection. And at the same time, geochemistry testing through core and fluid samples also confirmed that the reservoir is compatible with the injected CO2. We've also conducted well integrity assessments with at-risk wells scheduled to be plugged and abandoned. And the previous operator, Santos, has also looked at the existing Bayu Undan pipeline. It has been assessed and validated by third parties for long-term CO2 service. So several modeling, such as flow assurance, confirms that CO2 can be transported in that same pipeline. They've also proposed a monitoring plan, which aligns with best industry practices, and includes plume and vertical monitoring through legacy wells, seabed surveys, wellbore integrities, seismicity monitoring, post-injection monitoring, and these will continue 5 years after injection. And there are also additional environmental surveys that are planned. On the domestic legislation, we recognize that compared to our neighbors in the region, we are quite late. But in terms of that, we have already drafted a draft decree law, but it's specifically for Bayu Undan at this moment, because it allows for a faster legislative process. So in the future, similar decree laws will be needed for other gas fields, or they could even evolve into a general CCS decree law to cover all storage sites across the country. So the provisions include project title and agreement, the licensing procedures, which establishes permitting and regulatory oversight. This allows the ministry to delegate the regulatory powers to another public entity. So on the petroleum sector, we have an entity called AMP, which is the National Petroleum Authority. We might have a similar dedicated CCS regulator to regulate the CCS sector. Other provisions include operator obligations, such as reporting, HSE, local content, CSR. Other provisions like closure and decommissioning, transfer of responsibilities, well plugging, site restoration, long-term monitoring. And important is the cross-boundary coordination, which will enable cooperation with neighboring jurisdictions. So the plan is to pass this decree law before the end of this year, but the exact timing is dependent on the results of stakeholder consultations and negotiations, especially with the interested operator on the best path forward. With regards to bilateral engagement at the ministerial level, our minister, His Excellency, Mr. Francisco Monteiro, has met with his counterparts from METI in Japan. And you can see the image on the left. He is shaking hands with Minister Mutoyoji and also Minister Madeleine King, the Minister of Resources of Australia. And during these high-level discussions, they have agreed on cooperation in CCS and clean energy, which shows a pretty strong signal of strong political support. While no draft agreements have been initiated yet, preparations are underway, and these will be formalized soon. Other than that, there is also the establishment of the Transboundary Movement of CO2 Working Group, which brings together directors and officers from the governments of Australia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Timor-Leste. And this group meets and works to address the legal, regulatory, and technical challenges of cross-border CO2 transport, to harmonize the standards and to ensure the safe CO2 management. These are the main enablers that will be critical for the development of Bayu Undan CCS. First is the legislation of the CCS decree law and the establishment of the fiscal regime, including the incentives, the cost recovery mechanisms, liability arrangements, and other financial provisions. The second one is bilateral agreements or arrangements. They can take the form of binding treaties or non-binding MOUs. But binding treaties generally take longer to execute. So I think the government would opt to do MOUs with our partners. The scope of these agreements would also need to be considered, whether the partner countries would like to keep the scope pertaining only to Bayu Undan or to extend to all potential CCS storage sites in Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste, unlike most of the neighbors, is a non-contracting party to the London Protocol. So the exporting countries must be assured that the domestic legislation meets the minimum requirements to allow for safe CO2 transport. Carbon accounting would also be included in these bilateral agreements, and they include provisions to avoid double counting that align with national NDCs and follow IPCC guidelines. It might also include ITMOs, or internationally transferable mitigation outcomes, under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And this would incorporate corresponding adjustments to ensure that the emission reductions are credited correctly between both countries. And also engagement with customers. That's also critical. This allows us to understand the legal, the commercial, the regulatory, and the technical factors that may affect the potential buyers. So currently, customers that are interested in Bayu-Undan CCS is the Barossa field, which is operated by Santos. There is also interest shown by INPEX and SKENS, and Timor-Leste needs to actively engage with the market to attract additional customers and ensure the sustainable commercial model. So I'd like to just show you 3 potential business models that we can discuss with our stakeholders. The first one is where you get direct carbon account. As you can see on this diagram, there is a payment fee transferred from country A, from the partner, to Timor-Leste, to the title owner. There's also a cost associated with the CO2 leakages, but the carbon credit generated may come from either country A, the exporter, or through Timor-Leste. The second business model, it's similar to the previous one that I showed, but instead of carbon credits, there is a reduction in the carbon tax. So that also needs to be included in the bilateral agreements or arrangements between the countries. And the other business model that we're looking at is transferring the carbon credit to a third-party country or producer or business. So to conclude, Bayu-Undan represents an opportunity for our country to unlock multiple benefits. First, it offers a new industry with new revenue streams. When we monetize the CO2 storage, Timor-Leste can stimulate local supply chains and diversify the economy beyond the upstream hydrocarbons, which we have been doing for these past 2 decades. Business-wise, we believe that there is enough slices of the CCS storage pie in the region. And while we cannot yet definitively state the competitive advantage of Timor-Leste CCS, some areas that we aim to explore and model include competitive storage pricing, which could potentially be lower due to the lower capex of repurposing the existing assets, and also the lower OPEX from labor cost. We are also looking at probably potentially the opportunity for tax incentives, which can be linked to national tax policies of the emitter countries via the bilateral agreements. And another advantage is the proven geology that supports safe and reliable CO2 storage. Second, it provides quality jobs and capability building. Many Timorese workers have already been employed on the Bayu-Undan platform and have the skills to transition to CCS-related roles. CCS development will generate employment across technical, industrial, and service domains. And with strong local content requirements, we see that there will be many jobs created with this project. This ensures that Timorese workers, companies, and institutions gain direct and tangible benefits from the industry. Third, Bayu-Undan CCS is a local solution to a global problem. Timor-Leste could utilize the subsurface resource to contribute to measurable climate impact and help reduce global CO2 emissions. CCS development in Timor depends on G2G alignment. So we have to speed up formalized intergovernmental cooperation to advance the enabling frameworks, which will cover regulations, licensing, the tariffs, liability, monitoring, reporting, and verification to provide a clear and predictable environment for investment. And finally, strong industry and project development is essential. So we would have to work harder to engage with potential customers and industry stakeholders to allow Timor-Leste to understand the market demand, to assess the risk, and to address customer concerns. That is my presentation. If you would like to bring this conversation offline, my contact details are present on the screen. Drop me an email anytime so we can continue to discuss any potential cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Timmy, for your forward-looking presentation and in particularly the updated progress of the Bio-Udang CCS project, which is very exciting. And we have also 2 questions for you. The question number 1 is regarding the legislation, as you mentioned in the presentation. When do you expect the Timor-Leste CCS legislation to be formalized? And will there be a dedicated regulatory authority to oversee this program? It will be public held or private held, or it will be in the PPP partnership model?
Okay, thank you for the questions. I think I've mentioned it in my presentation. So we do not have a definitive date or month yet on when it would be legislated, but for sure it would be before the end of the year, 2025. We are currently in negotiations and consultations with several stakeholders, but the main one is with Santos. And so we have to agree on several terms before we bring this to the Council of Ministers for approval.
Thank you, Ms. Timmy. And the second question is, yes, you mentioned a lot of the key enablers, but from your perspective, what is the biggest roadblocker that hinder the bilateral agreements or MOUs? And by removing it, you think it will expedite the process rapidly?
Like I mentioned, we haven't entered into formal discussions with our partners yet. I think the roadblocker is not, I think it's the domestic legislation. Yeah. So it depends on us to pass that first before we can enter formal discussions with countries, because the domestic legislation is also a prerequisite and would also be seen by the exporting countries, whether it aligns with the London Protocol or not.
Exactly.
And I forgot to address the question on the regulator. So like I mentioned, we have a regulator not directly under our the administration of our ministry in the petroleum sector called AMP. So we're thinking of also establishing a similar regulatory body like that, specifically for CCS. Yep.
Yes, and we share your same comments and look forward to more concrete regulatory progress from Timor-Leste and jointly establish the APAC CCS ecosystem. Thank you, Mr. Timmy.
Thank you very much.
And our next speaker brings the North American perspective. Please welcome Mr. Greg Rositis, Investment Attraction Advisor at investable. Mr. Greg will explore Japan-Alberta collaboration models, highlighting Alberta's CCS infrastructure and how both regions can benefit from investment and innovation linkage. Greg, the stage is now yours.
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Rositis. Just give me a second. Thank you, Molly, and thanks to everybody, to leader associates there for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Just give me 1 second. I have to fix my screen a little bit. Okay. For those who don't know, the Invest Alberta Corporation it's a government agency or a crown corporation, which focuses on promoting foreign direct investment into the province of Alberta. And we basically act as a concierge service to help foreign companies navigate the Alberta investment ecosystem. by helping them understand available government programs, connect them to relevant government agencies, provide site selection services, and provide introductions to professional services like law firms, accounting firms, consultants, etc. And we also provide information on potential investment opportunities and provide appropriate introductions. I represent Invest Alberta in Japan and work closely with Japanese companies in exploring Alberta for their business expansion or investment efforts. And we have offices around the world and are well connected with industry and government leaders. Many of you may already know something about Canada's geography, but for those who don't, Canada is made up of 10 provinces and a few territories up in the north. The provinces govern most land and energy rights within their borders, managing mineral rights and granting leases. The federal government and federal agencies govern energy on federal lands and regulate cross-boundary energy infrastructure and Indigenous interests. The Indigenous governing bodies hold significant land rights and have important authority over land and resource management throughout Canada. This layered governance means energy rights and land rights management involves coordination across multiple governments and Indigenous organizations depending on the location and nature of the land or the resource involved. And just like many of the Canadian provinces, as you can see here, Alberta is a large province and it's more than twice the area of Japan and has long been considered as Canada's energy hub. The two major cities are Edmonton to the north and Calgary to the south. And many of you who may not have heard of those cities, but may have heard of places like Banff and just in our province there as well. I want to describe a little bit about Alberta's CCUS landscape. And as the world continues to fight against climate changes, Canada's integrated approach to energy production and environmental responsibility stands out as a global model. Alberta continues to lead the charge in implementing carbon capture and EOR with vast natural resources and a strong regulatory framework. Alberta is well positioned to leverage CCS for both emissions reductions and an increased oil recovery. Alberta's carbon storage resources are vast, with over 100 billion tons of estimated capacity in deep saline aquifers and oil and gas reservoirs. Rather than abandoning hydrocarbons altogether, Alberta focuses on innovative ways to use its natural gas and oil resources more cleanly, including CCUS, hydrogen production, and cleaner fuels such as LNG. Alberta's large capacity for carbon storage provides the foundation for large-scale CCUS. We have over a decade of experience and leadership with about $2 billion invested in major CCUS projects like the Shell Quest project, which was commissioned back in 2015, and the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, which was commissioned in 2020, and which is a 240-kilometer pipeline that transports captured CO2 to oil fields for enhanced oil recovery and permanent storage. Alberta has a long-standing industrial carbon tax driven by the demands from emitters for cleaner practices, and its decarbonization strategy aims for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The province developed one of Canada's most advanced regulatory frameworks for CCUS between 2011 and 2013, ensuring safety, environmental, and technical consistency. Under the oversight of the Alberta Energy Regulator, Alberta CCUS regulations are globally recognized, supporting carbon offset credits and incentivizing commercial deployment through innovative programs such as the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Regulation, otherwise known as TIER. In 2022, the government of Alberta selected 25 new CCUS projects for further evaluation. Of these, 7 new projects have the potential to increase the province's CCUS capacity to about 56 million tons of CO2 per year by 2030. The Japanese industry is currently participating actively in Alberta's CCUS market. Alberta's CCUS hubs are central to its climate strategy because they offer an efficient and effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across a range of industrial sectors by safely storing large volumes of CO2 in suitable geological formations. These hubs support the decarbonization of industries beyond oil sands, including power generation, hydrogen production, data center operations, which I'll speak a little bit about later, and manufacturing sectors, enabling large-scale carbon management that aligns with both provincial and national climate goals. The companies noted here on this slide are just a few of the leaders which are currently involved in Alberta's CCUS industry. And as I mentioned earlier, one of Alberta's largest CCUS projects is the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. Operational since 2020, the ACTL captures CO2 from industrial sources in Alberta's industrial heartland in the Edmonton region to the north and transports it to mature oil reservoirs in central Alberta for enhanced oil recovery and permanent underground storage. The pipeline has a transporting capacity of up to 14.6 million tons of CO2 annually, equivalent to the emissions from over 2.6 million cars. Its design includes excess capacity to accommodate further facilities and expand carbon management in the province. There are both federal and provincial government incentive programs to help with the development of CCUS projects in Alberta. And the provincial ACIP program, noted here, provides grants covering 12% of the eligible capital costs for new CCUS projects. The program aims to accelerate CCUS infrastructure development in Alberta, supporting activities such as CO2 capture, preparation, compression, transport, storage, and utilization. The federal CCUS ITC is a refundable tax credit that applies to eligible expenditures incurred for qualified CCUS projects from 2022 to 2040. Together, Alberta CCUS projects can recover roughly 55 to 70% of eligible CCUS capital costs through these combined federal and provincial incentives if they start before 2031 and meet labor and eligible use requirements. We can talk offline later if you want to get more information about these incentive programs. The Polaris Atlas CCUS project, this is a major expansion of carbon capture in Alberta, and it's expected to capture a significant portion of emissions from Shell's Scotford complex and permanently store them underground. It's set to begin operating in late 2028 and is backed by substantial federal and provincial support and designed for future open access carbon storage by multiple industrial emitters. Polaris and Atlas will leverage the achievements of the Quest CCS facility, which has captured over 9 million tons of CO2 since 2015. Polaris could reduce Scope 1 CO2 emissions by up to 40% at the refinery and 22% at the chemicals complex. Whoops, sorry. CO2 captured by Polaris will be sent via a 22-kilometer pipeline to storage wells approximately 2 kilometers underground. Alberta will be home to the world's first cross-technology carbon removal innovation and commercialization center called Deep Sky Alpha. This center is powered 100% by renewable energy and will safely and permanently store carbon underground in Alberta's CCS hubs. The complex occupies about 5 to 6 acres in an industrial park, about an hour north of Calgary, and includes process buildings, CO2 storage systems, and utility distribution, and even an education center. Up to 10 different DAC technologies are being developed or being deployed simultaneously, sourced from leading innovators worldwide, making this the first center of its kind to test and optimize competing solutions under identical operational conditions. Deep Sky is helping establish Alberta as a global leader in carbon removal, with $40 million in funding from Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Catalyst Fund and commitments from major companies like Microsoft and the Royal Bank of Canada to purchase carbon removal credits. This project is growing very quickly. And as the current US administration appears to pulling back support in this industry, this provides an opportunity for overseas investors to look closely at what we're doing in Alberta. And some believe that some of the uncertainty that we see south of the border opens a window of opportunity for Canada to become the new hotbed for carbon removal. I want to talk a little bit about Alberta's data center industry, because as you may know, there are many well-known data center hubs around, including Ireland, China, Singapore, Arizona, some of the states, and even UK and Germany. However, one of the fastest growing hubs today is in Alberta. Alberta was discovered by some of the largest hyperscale operators and co-locators about 12 to 18 months ago, and has since become one of the fastest growing data center hubs. And since then, the Alberta government has encouraged and welcomed data center development into the province and is fully supportive of this growth industry. And there are a number of reasons why Alberta has become such an attractive place to set up AI compute data centers. First of all, we have a deregulated electricity market and cheap energy with almost unlimited volumes of natural gas. We have very fast connectivity throughout the province, and we have some of the lowest land costs in Canada's metro regions. We have a lot of water which flows from the Rocky Mountains in the northern part of the province, and we have a fast-growing population with a young and talented workforce. We have a lot of renewable energy in the forms of solar and wind and some thermal. And of course, we have a cold climate and a stable geology, which means no earthquakes or typhoons, which is key in data center operations. We have a very supportive government and welcoming business environment. And as I mentioned, Alberta has almost unlimited volumes of natural gas, which provides cheap energy for the data center operators. And as many of them must adhere to strong ESG goals, the option to decarbonize the required power generation via Alberta's CCS hubs is becoming hugely attractive. You'll see in the coming months some major announcements coming from Alberta's data center world, and understand why Alberta may soon become the world's foremost AI compute data center hub. And Alberta's CCS ecosystem will play a big role in the development of and decarbonization of this fast-growing industry. I also want to talk about hydrogen production, and Alberta is the largest producer of hydrogen in Canada, producing more than 60% of Canada's hydrogen supply today. Alberta is currently producing approximately 2.5 million tons of hydrogen for industrial purposes, with an abundant supply of low-cost natural gas feedstock and decades of experience in producing hydrogen and suitable pore space to sequester CO2 emissions permanently. Alberta has become a global leader in hydrogen economy and produces the world's lowest cost, low carbon intensity hydrogen. And just like other emissions reduction centers, the Canadian federal government offers clean hydrogen ITCs, which incentivizes investment in technologies and equipment for producing low carbon hydrogen, including electrolysis and emissions abated processes such as CCUS enabled hydrogen from natural gas. Alberta's hydrogen roadmap seeks to establish the province as a leading global supplier of clean hydrogen by 2030 by fostering market development and integrating CCUS, streamlining regulations, investing in technology, and expanding exports with the goal of scaling hydrogen use across Alberta's energy system for both domestic and international markets. And this concludes the presentation of the presentation portion here. I hope you learned a little bit about this little part of the world in Canada and Alberta's role and value proposition in terms of how it fits within Japan's interest. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for laying out Alberta's robust CCS infrastructure and the potential for cross-Pacific investment cooperation. Clearly, we see a very comprehensive CCS project ecosystem from traditional carbon capture to DAC and carbon removal, and a very exciting data center plus CCS opportunities, as well as clean hydrogen. So we do have two follow-up questions for you. And number one, you mentioned the Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program, ACCIP, is still pending federal finalization. What is the realistic timeline for Alberta's full incentive package to go alive? You mentioned the year of 2031. Is that the year you are expecting?
Actually, the ASIP incentive in Alberta is ready to go, and we're just waiting on the federal government review of our tier system, and that's expected to take place actually in September. And so we think the full incentive package, both on the provincial side and on the federal side, which will provide incentives on the capital requirements for your project up to almost 70%. And that should take place probably, we expect that to be October, November.
This year.
Yeah, this year, not 2031, this year.
Thank you, Greg. And the second question is, how important are international investors, particularly the Japan investors, in financing Alberta's CCUS projects? What's your expected support from Japan companies as well as the Japan government supporting system?
Well, international investors, and more specifically, especially Japan investors, are becoming a more increasingly important in financing our CCUS projects, mainly because even though we have our federal and provincial incentives, the projects still require significant private capital to reach FID on these projects. And we see that Japan's government and industry, I mean, they're all looking at overseas CCUS partnerships under the GX strategy. And with institutions like JOGMEC and JBIC, I mean, they offer risk sharing and long tenor financing. And Japanese trading houses and technology leaders like MHI and some of the others, I mean, they're already involved in Alberta. And this alignment with Alberta's massive geological capacity and our policy investments, incentives with Japan's decarbonization goals, this creates a real strong fit for both equity, debt, and technology collaboration, accelerating the project timelines and reducing the financing risks for all the projects. So yeah, we expect both industry and government to play a very important role in the financing and of the CCUS projects within the Alberta area.
Yes, and it will be a win-win collaboration between the two countries. Yes. And finally, to close our program, I'm honored to introduce our final but not least speaker, Mr. Keisuke Hosoi, Director for Division 1 Energy Solutions Finance Department at the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC. Mr. Hosoi will offer a financial lens on CCUS, outlining JBIC's strategic priorities and how public financial institutions can play in scaling cross-border investment. Mr. Hosoi, now the stage is yours.
All right. Again, my name is Keisuke Hosoi, and the Director for Division 1 of the Energy Solutions Finance Department at JBIC. And briefly, let me just briefly introduce myself. So since joining JBIC in 2008, I have been involved in the financing energy-related projects, including oil and gas finance. So I believe that expertise developed through structuring finance in the energy sector is highly applicable to project finance in CCUS. So based on this understanding, and JBIC has been participating in the government working group and aims to contribute to policy recommendations that enhance the bankability of CCUS project. So before going into detail, I just briefly explain the Japanese CCUS situation. And the Japanese government now positions CCUS as a key decarbonization measure for hard to abate sectors such as steel, cement, and chemicals and oil refining, as well as for certain parts of the power sector, including both coal and gas-fired generation. And toward achieving net zero emission by 2050, the Japanese government is working on institutional design with the aim of launching CCUS projects in the early 2030s. In 2023, the Japanese total CO2 emissions were approximately 1.04 billion tons, of which around 870 million tons were energy related. To address this, the government has set targets to store 12 to 24 million tons of CO2 annually by 2030 and 120 to 240 million tons annually by 2050 through CCS. To achieve these goals, the government is considering support schemes that cover the entire CCS value chain, capture, transport, and storage, with a particular focus on securing cash flow and sharing risks during the early stages of project development. And then, so CCS projects are strongly characterized by economies of scale. And as project size increases, the cost per ton of CO2 decreases, and making large-scale deployment more economically attractive. However, this also means that initial capital investment rises proportionally, resulting in substantial financial needs. To meet these needs, project finance, without relying on corporate balance sheet, is considered an effective approach. However, current CCUS projects face multiple challenges that make it difficult to secure financing from private financial institutions. So just let me show you an example. So high upfront investment, and so meaning the significant capex burden, and also uncertainty in revenue forecast, which means like a carbon price volatility, and the difficulty in the securing long-term contracts, which is like due to lack of policy consensus and the challenges in forming CO2 handling agreement, and the cross-chain risk, which is like interdependence among capture, transport, and storage. And also CO2 leakages issues also there. So to address these challenges, institutional support is essential, and government measures such as carbon price compensation and risk-sharing mechanisms and support for long-term contract formation are key to improving bankability and enabling, which enables project finance. So next page shows about the key element of CCS support schemes. And since February 2025, the Japanese government has held 5 sessions of the working group on CCS project support measures and has compiled an interim summary now. So the scheme is designed primarily for domestic pipeline-based projects and consists of 3 core elements. So this presentation material shows like that the element. The first one is the support targets the 2 cost categories. Sorry, the first one comprised of capture cost. And also the second one is transport and also storage fees. These are combined into reference cost, which is compared against the carbon price and formed through mechanism like GX ETS, which will start since from 2026. Government support is provided based on the volumes of CO2 handled and the gap between two prices. This financial support is expected to be continuous throughout the support period. And to ease financial burdens and improve cash flow, upfront support for capex is also under consideration. By compensating the gap between carbon price and the CCS cost, which is a reference price, the scheme aims to enhance revenue certainty for project developers. and accelerates the launch of CCS value chain. The support period is designed to last until carbon prices exceed CCS cost, ensuring predictability for developers. Additionally, the support for forming long-term contracts beyond the project finance repayment period is crucial to stabilize revenue forecast and facilitate risk assessment by financial institutions. Now moving on to next pillar. The support scheme also includes institutional mechanism to mitigate risks for project developers. To address post-investment cost fluctuations, an automatic adjustment system using benchmark prices such as electricity price and also fuel costs is planned. This allows a flexible response to changing OPEX. And for cross-chain risks, where disruption in a part of the value chain affects the others. Measures such as extending the support period or providing up for the capex payments are being considered on a case-by-case basis. And furthermore, to promote self-sufficiency, and developers may be required to continue operations for a certain period after the support ends. This obligation applies to both capture and transport storage, and the CCU-based alternative may be accepted under the scheme. And the third pillar, and another unique risk in CCS project is a stranded asset risk of storage sites. This refers to situations where geological issues or regulatory changes make continued storage infeasible. Since such risks are not fully insurable by the private sector, careful policy discussions are needed to determine appropriate government backstop mechanism. And I just prepared the material. The design of like Japanese support scheme shares common principles with international models such as UK contract for difference and also the Netherlands SDE plus scheme and Norway's long SIP project. JBIC has like as you can see has developed a schematic of our UK CFD model which addresses many of the issues discussed so far. And going back to the previous slides, CCS is also important from international, looking at the third pillar. CCS is also important from international collaboration perspective. In anticipation of cross-border CCS, the concept of unbundling, clarifying responsibilities and the contractual relationship among capture, transport, and storage operators is expected to be considered in line with domestic institutional development and project maturity. On the technical front, Japan is conducting demonstration projects for liquefied CO2 shipping and future development of cross-border CCS across Asia-Pacific countries is anticipated. And from a regulatory standpoint, institutional arrangements such as amendments to the London Protocol and bilateral agreements and international consensus on long-term liability for CO2 storage are essential. Some countries have already established frameworks for transferring long-term liability after site closure, and regional cooperation toward building CCS value chains is progressing. And finally, this might be the main topic for today, but the JBIC's role. Let me just briefly touch on the JBIC's role in the CCS. JBIC aims to contribute to CCS projects formed under these institutional frameworks by providing financing as a policy-based financial institutions. In particular, JBIC is expected to serve as a bridge between policy and also projects through and long-term financing for large-scale infrastructure projects, and including cross-border CCS. And they're exploring risk-taking opportunities in early-stage CCS project, and also facilitating strategic public-private cooperation with key sector players and the policymaker across the Asia-Pacific regions. And JBIC is currently strengthening collaboration with key public and private players in the Asia-Pacific region. And even before institutional frameworks are fully established, we are engaging in discussions with such stakeholders on potential cooperation with Japanese companies and the feasibility of the CCS. Such international collaboration is a crucial step towards the social implementation of CCS and regional decarbonizations. And JBIC is committed to playing an active role in such area. Thank you very much for your attention. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Hosoi-san, for sharing JBIC's strategic thinking on how to catalyze CCUS project finance, a critical part of unlocking regional scale. To follow up your presentation, question number 1 is, how's your level of openness in terms of cross-border CCS, as you shared a lot of like domestic CCUS finance efforts, not a lot about cross-border CCS?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, even though we are a member of like Japanese government committee, but at the same time, JBIC's like primary role in the Japanese the policy implementation. Actually, we are only the institution like to support Japanese companies overseas investment, not the domestic investment. So from such point of view, in their stage of like financing, actual financing, and we can only engage in the international project, not domestic project. From that point of view, we are very open to the international and the cross-border CCS project. But as I just mentioned, since the institutional framework to support CCS project is, we believe it's very important. So that's why we have joined in the such committee from domestic CCS, considering domestic CCS project first.
Thank you, Hosoi-san. And let's zoom in a little bit more. So as a financial institution, what's the most important policy lever for JBIC to commit finance? It will be carbon pricing, liability risk sharing, or bilateral templates, let's say.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very difficult. And while institutional design is broadly important, and from a financing perspective, and the most critical bottleneck today is kind of a lack of viable project economies. And specifically, the fact that the CO2 treatment costs remain lower than the unit cost of CCS projects. And this makes it difficult to structure bankable deals. Unless the gap is addressed, private sector financing will remain limited, and project finance structures will be hard to realize. And therefore, the most essential enabler for cross-border CCS is the establishment of kind of like national frameworks, like such as carbon pricing or kind of like financial support schemes that ensure project level revenue certainty. That's my initial thought like on this.
Thank you. And the last question before I let you go. We see great opportunities for CCS investment, but in the meantime, the amount of capital is massive. Looking out to 2035, what scale of investment does JBIC envision for cross-border CCS?
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, the answer is very difficult to make. Well, the Japanese government, in the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that the Japanese government has set CCS target of 6 to 12 million tons like per year by 2030, and 1 120 to 240 million tons per year by 2050. Given the limited domestic storage capacity, cross-border CCS is expected to play a critical role in the medium to long term. And by 2035, handling kind of tens of millions of tons annually through cross-border routes appears. I'm not so sure it can be say like realistic, but still that's a target of Japanese government. And kind of to meet this demand, Japanese JBIC believes that phased rollout of cross-border CCS starting in the early 2030s through regulatory development and pilot project is essential. By 2035, financing volumes across multiple corridors could reach several billions of dollars cumulatively. So, but this is very tentative number. It's difficult to say, but from the target, and I can calculate like such kind of a number, but still the unclear. Well, I hope we could support as many projects as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Hosoi-san, for your kind address and for JBIC's commitment to CCS and cross-border CCS ecosystem. And over the past 2 hours, thank you, and thank you to all the speakers joining the session. Over the past 2 hours, we've seen how Japan cross-border CCS strategy is evolving and with cooperation stretching across Australia, Southeast Asia, North America, and beyond. It's clear that international partnerships will be the backbone of a scalable, investable carbon management system. And on behalf of Leader Associates, I'd like to thank again to all our distinguished speakers for your generous insights and all our audience for your active participation and excellent questions. A quick reminder that today's session was recorded and we will share the replay with you next week. And if you'd like to continue this conversation in person, we warmly invite you to join us at the Japan CCUS Summit 2025, taking place on October the 15th to 16th in Tokyo, Japan.